Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Now, Alexander Povetkin has offered an update on his situation and who his next opponent will be, and obviously it is going to be Dillian Whyte. There are no other options being considered for Alexander Povetkin. It will definitely be Dillian Whyte. So that is great because I think that Dillian Whyte doesn't want to be facing anyone other than Povetkin in his next fight, because that is important. That is the big fight for Dillian Whyte at the moment. Povetkin, no one else. Luis Ortiz was talked about, Deontay Wilder was talked about, and Andy Ruiz, but those fights were not realistic in the fact that Dillian Whyte needs to sort out this situation, and the situation at the moment is Alexander Povetkin. He lost to him, so he needs to avenge that. I don't think that Dillian Whyte will be able to happily move on until that is sorted, so the fight seems to be, I guess, kind of touted for spring, which could be a huge time for boxing because Eddie Hearn was talking about making Golovkin versus Andrade, and also Canelo versus Billy Joe Saunders. Then there was also talk about Gennady Golovkin versus Jaime Munguia, which is a great fight. So if Dillian Whyte is in that mix also, then springtime is a good time for boxing, especially considering it might also be Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury in May. So some great fights coming up, and this one needs to be added to that. I think that it's the biggest fight for Dillian Whyte at the moment because Wilder would be big, Ruiz would be big, Luis Ortiz wouldn't be as big, but still, those are big fights. This one's bigger because it's a rematch and considering what happened in the first fight. So it is important that Whyte sorts this situation out. And I do believe he beats Povetkin in the rematch. Then Dillian Whyte can go and face the likes of Luis Ortiz or Deontay Wilder, Andy Ruiz, maybe even someone else. There are many opponents that he can get in there with. Michael Hunter would be a very entertaining fight. So there are plenty of fights on the horizon for Dillian Whyte, and they will still be there after the Povetkin fight. He doesn't want to go away from that, I don't think, with that unresolved. So if he did fight, say, Luis Ortiz next and wait for Povetkin, he still does need that situation resolved, and I think that the only way he can do that is by getting back in the ring with Povetkin, and that is what will happen next, because Povetkin is looking at no one else. He is obviously contracted and obligated to fight Dillian Whyte next. The fight was put off due to symptoms of COVID, and he had a worse bout of it than was first expected. So the fight was put back, which is frustrating for Dillian Whyte of course, but still, at least the fight is still there, and at least Povetkin is planning to honour that arrangement, which he will. He'll get back in there with Dillian Whyte. He's not talking about anyone else other than Dillian Whyte. He's back at light training now and will start his training camp working towards that spring date, whenever that might be. But again, around that springtime, some great fights coming up, and I think that Dillian Whyte can really push himself back up into the rankings, or he will be WBC interim world champion once again, if he is to beat Alexander Povetkin, which I believe he can. He just needs to stay switched on and ensure that he doesn't get caught with any silly punches. I wouldn't say lucky punch because I think that Povetkin was looking for that. I think that that was something he was looking to find in the fight, and it paid off. So I think that Povetkin was very good in the fight with Dillian Whyte. I think that it was closer maybe than some could make out. The commentary wasn't necessarily biased, but I think that they were admiring the work of Dillian Whyte more than Povetkin, because I wouldn't say Povetkin wanted to necessarily win the first few rounds. I think that what he wanted to do was maybe take it to the mid rounds, maybe take it to the late rounds where he could force a mistake from Dillian Whyte and the stars could line up so he could land that big punch, and that is exactly what happened. So maybe it was a good, carefully planned game plan from Alexander Povetkin. The result stands, 5th round knockout victory over Dillian Whyte. Now, that being said, Dillian Whyte knows what to expect the next time, but then again so does Povetkin. The rematch often goes the same way as the first fight, but in this situation, given the success that Dillian Whyte had, you would have to consider, is Dillian Whyte the favourite going into the rematch instead of Povetkin, even though Povetkin won the first fight? Now that is a very good question, because I think that Alexander Povetkin can still find punches that will bother Dillian Whyte. It's not going to be easy. Put all of the boxing aside, the ability, the game plan inside the ring, you have to think about what is Dillian Whyte's mindset going to be walking to the ring, getting in there and seeing Povetkin. There are going to be demons from what happened last time, but Dillian Whyte is a consummate professional, and you would expect him to overcome those mental hurdles. I think he will, because He's been there before, he's lost to AJ. He did come back, although he didn't have an immediate rematch with Anthony Joshua, so that will be one big difference. With AJ, he went back and rebuilt. This time, he's got to go straight back into the Lion's Den and do it all over again, but this time, try and change the result. And what is always interesting about rematches is the fighter who's going in after taking a loss will always approach the rematch in a completely different manner. I'd be surprised if Dillian Whyte goes in there with the same kind of game plan. It was working, but ultimately, the result is Povetkin won the fight, so there was something that didn't work in there. A mistake that Dillian Whyte made. One also, though, that Alexander Povetkin capitalized on, and I mean, he threw the punch. It wasn't a lucky punch because every punch in there is intended to land and cause that kind of effect, so no lucky punches at all. But what is interesting is a fighter will always say they're going to pick up how they left off. I mean, Dillian Whyte can say that he's going to go in there and do something similar but avoid the mistakes that he made. He won't. He'll do something different. Not hugely, but there will be differences in this next performance to the one we saw last time. It's going to be, because if you imagine the mindset and what Dillian Whyte must go through during the camp, thinking about, okay, I have to change this, I have to be different from that, and the performance last time, yes, it was working in this aspect, but I still lost the fight. So there are certain things that do need to change. So that is constantly going to be running through the mind of Dillian Whyte in the build-up to this fight. So when you consider that, the performance will be different. I wouldn't expect Dillian Whyte to do the same thing in this next fight as he done last time, because that never happens in a rematch. Purely because of the result of the first fight and the devastating fashion in which it happened, because Dillian Whyte was knocked out. He was out before he hit the ground, so it was devastating. But Dillian Whyte is tough and mentally very strong. That will show and serve him well in this rematch. Still, he will be doing things a lot differently, because if it didn't work last time, then it's not going to work this time. Going in there with that kind of mindset, thinking this was working, that was working, it was just one little mistake, one lucky punch, then the same thing could happen again. Because let's remember this wasn't some unknown guy who suddenly announced himself onto the world stage by knocking out Dillian Whyte, and is he that good, or was Dillian Whyte maybe off the gas slightly? No. None of that existed in this fight. Alexander Povetkin is a tried and tested world level operator, and that was what's shown and what was the difference in that fight. So we cannot expect Alexander Povetkin to freeze, we cannot expect him to underestimate Dillian Whyte in any way, shape or form. Alexander Povetkin will show up with the same kind of mindset as he did for the first fight. That is one thing about him, he's always consistent. You don't often see bad performances from Alexander Povetkin. He is always consistent, and if he is a little bit off the gas, like he was in the early stages of the Michael Hunter fight, which was down to Michael Hunter's speed and movement, and his aggression as well, but he always finds a way back in the fight. He got a draw from that fight, which is incredible considering how he started. So he's tough, he's rough, and he's mentally very strong, but also a very smart, clever boxer, and that is what tells in these kind of fights. So Whyte is going to have to be very careful and on his A game if he wants to overturn this in the next fight. So guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? What is your assessment of this rematch? Do you expect Dillian Whyte to be the favourite going in and to therefore get the victory, or do you expect Alexander Povetkin to be the favourite, and do you expect Povetkin to get the same kind of result over Dillian Whyte? Because that is very possible if Whyte isn't on his A game. In my opinion, I would say that Dillian Whyte does beat Povetkin, but by no stretch of the imagination is it going to be easy. But guys, make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also leave a thumbs up and a subscribe if you are new. Thanks guys.